Most businesses only focus on growing and expanding, and they give little to no attention to their exit strategies until after exit is staring them in the face. Learn here at Boosting Business Value, brought to you by Blue Sky Business Resources. You'll discover how to shape a more durable and saleable business, and how to implement a powerful, well-planned, and rewarding exit. Join Dr. David Gruder and Jason Tazinkowicz as they deliver actionable tips for lower middle market company owners, executives, and their trusted advisors. Find out where your business currently stands, how you can meet your revenue objectives more reliably, and how to grow your venture to the next level, all with a smooth and fruitful exit in mind. Here are your hosts, Dr. David and Jason.
Well, welcome back. In this episode, we are going to reveal how to determine what a good business buyer is for you and your business, and how to separate legitimate prospective buyers from questionable ones. And for those of you who are new to this Boosting Business Value podcast, I'm David Gruder, the business lifecycle, exit planning, and post-acquisition psychologist for Blue Sky Business Resources. And with me, as always, is the ever-luminous Jason Tazinkowicz, Blue Sky's Chief Operations Officer. Take it away, Jason.
No fair picking on my ghostly complexion, my friend. So, let's get into this, Doc. As we're talking about what is a good buyer, we're thinking about an individual or an organization that has made an offer to acquire a business, and the business owner is deciding, do I take this offer seriously? Is this somebody that I want to pay attention to or not? And for every different business owner, the question of what a good buyer is going to depend a lot on their own individual goals and objectives. So there's a lot of subjectivity in there. But what we found is that there are 4 characteristics that are universal. And the very first one of those is wherewithal. Is that prospective buyer actually capable of closing a deal? That goes into, do they have the money, right? But there's a lot more to it. Do they have the money in cash? Do they have the ability to obtain credit? Are they looking for a third party to back their acquisition? And understanding that wherewithal, understanding the picture of that will give you a good idea of how complex the process of working through a closing with them will be, even if it looks like they can come up with the money. And so we'll talk a little bit more about the different buyers and where that comes into play later. But the first question you always have to be asking yourself, if you're a business owner and you get an offer to purchase, is can they actually close the deal?
Indeed. And if the answer to that is yes, then that leads to the second core characteristic that's universal in decision-making, which is dependability. Does the potential buyer actually have a track record of doing what they say they're going to do with businesses? Can you reasonably count on them to do what they say they're going to do? Are they really in integrity? Because if you try to get in bed with a buyer who has ethics or integrity deficits, not only will the selling process be fraught with complications, but the chances that you're going to be happy with the outcome are low to none.
Absolutely. And you would never not think about checking references or doing a background check on an employee. Treat a prospective buyer the same way. Don't hesitate to ask for references. Don't hesitate to do a background check. That's good and important stuff. And then the next thing is alignment. We always want to have, when we're facilitating a transaction, we always want to have a fair amount of time where the business owner, the executive team, the buyer, and their team break bread together and get to know one another in a non-negotiation setting. Because you really want to know, is this person or a group that will be good to your brand and your people when you're not there? And it's so important because obviously, if you care about your people, you care about the legacy of your business, you're going to want to know that not only do you get to ride off into the sunset with some cash in the bank and security for the rest of your life, but that you can know that your team and your brand are in good hands. That speaks exactly to culture and integrity.
It sure does. It sure does. And very much aligned with that is legacy. Does the buyer's vision match? Is it compatible with your business's goals and your exit goals? So those aren't the same. they're hopefully compatible. They need to be compatible, but the goals that your business has and that you have for your business continuing after you exit, and your goals in your own exit in terms of things like how much does the business actually need to be sold for in order for you to meet your goals? And are there potential buyers that can pay that amount of money? So what the buyer wants to do with your business must match what you want done with your business after you leave.
Yeah, that's huge.
Mm-hmm. And that leads us into three big challenges with identifying a good buyer. And the first of those is to know what your business is worth and understand the market for your industry. So what we see over and over again is that business owners are so close to their business and their view of how precious it is so magnified in a way that what they think their business is worth and what it's actually worth, there's a pretty big gap between those two things. So coming out of denial and getting really clear through doing an independent valuation so that you actually know what your business is worth is the first part of the first of the three big challenges with identifying a good buyer. And then the second part of the first challenge is understanding how the market is performing in your industry. Because if you're wanting to sell during a down market, what that's going to mean in terms of price is going to be different than if you're wanting to sell during an up market. And not only that, but if you're wanting to sell in a crowded market versus an uncrowded market, those are all going to influence what your business is worth.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the interesting thing about markets is, like right now, we are in a market that is volatile. We're frothy. And so there's not a lot of activity for mediocre businesses, but there's a ton of action right now where buyers are purchasing in the margins. Businesses that are best in class are getting a premium in value, and businesses that are in some state of distress are getting purchased for steep discounts. But there's not a lot of activity in the middle of the market. But also understanding the market will help you define who's actually buying in the market. Are there big corporations or companies that are consolidating into themselves? Or are there a lot of financial buyers, private equity groups, and the like that are coming in and trying to play in this market? Understanding who's buying in your market is going to be a big part of understanding who you can target and figuring out how that fits with your overall buyer avatar expectations. Easy for me to say.
What I want to footnote for our viewers is that when you say right now, what you're referring to in terms of time is spring of 2023.
That's true. I'm really not good at the greenfield verbiage yet, but I'll get there.
I got you.
Anyway, so going into the second big challenge, this is where we start talking about understanding what these different types of buyers are and how that'll impact the buyer profile and exit expectations that you can start to develop. And there are two major categories of buyers. There are external and internal buyers. When it comes to external buyers, we've got financial buyers, which are predominantly private equity groups. Now, they're buying one of two things. They're either buying a platform that they can, start out strong and then build up to exit either through a placement offering, an IPO, or an exit upstream to a larger company. Or they're looking for bolt-ons to their platform companies. One of the strategies that private equity groups use to grow their platform companies is to buy a bunch of smaller companies and tuck them in. And so understanding that those are the two types of purchases that private equity firms most commonly make, and understanding based on size, whether or not you are an appropriate candidate for a platform, or if it's more appropriate that you're a bolt-on. And that size range usually breaks off at between $3 and $5 million of EBITDA. If you're above $3 million, it's likely that you can be a platform acquisition. If you're above $5 million in EBITDA, you are a strong contender to be a platform company. And what happens there is If you are a platform company, your brand carries on. So if legacy is important to you and you think that a private equity buyer is where you want to be, you can really protect your legacy and the brand durability by growing up into that $3 to $5 million of EBITDA space before you try to exit. If you're acquired as a bolt-on, it's really a toss-up as to whether or not they decide to keep your brand underneath the larger umbrella, or if they just make your brand go away and assimilate your people, your equipment, and your skills to service the larger brand. So that's private equity groups. The next one is unfunded sponsors. You'll also hear these called search funds. And that is where an executive who may not have the wherewithal by themselves to purchase a business, but doesn't want to work in corporate America anymore, goes and talks to a bunch of financial investors, usually family offices, and says, hey, I want to go run a business. Will you back me if I find a business to purchase? Now, the good thing about unfunded sponsors is that they'll typically keep your business and your brand the way it was and use their skills and their experience to make it grow. The tricky thing with unfunded sponsors is that you've got now two masters in the purchasing negotiation. The operator who wants to buy the business will make you an offer, but then they have to go back to their funding partners, convince them to make that offer. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later when we're getting into pros and cons. Then there is a synergistic buyer. A synergistic buyer is like a private equity group that is bolting companies into their platform. It's a large player in your space, a major company that is using the same strategy of growing through acquisition. Now, synergistic buyers will most commonly roll your equipment and people under their brand name. There are small exceptions to that. If you have a really strong regional presence and brand reputation, they may do a DBA. They may keep that brand name and leave that alone, but it's not very common in the larger synergistic companies because they're usually big enough that their brand name is stronger everywhere. And then we've got the high net worth individuals. High net worth individuals are very similar to unfunded sponsors, only they're using their own money. They are executives with a long history of running businesses who are tired of making wealth for a corporation and want to buy their next job and generate that wealth for themselves. And the great thing about them is that they very frequently keep the business largely as is. And again, use their skills and expertise to make it grow, but they're also working with their own money. And so it's a lot easier to close those deals. Now, Doctor, do you want to tell us about internal buyers?
I will be happy to do that. There are basically four categories, if you will, of internal buyers. The first is family succession, where you have family members that you would like to see carry on your company and where they want to carry on your company. This often gets muddy because there are situations where you want family succession, but there's no one in your family that wants your company, or where you want family succession, and there may be people in your family that want the company, but they don't have what it's going to take in order to keep the company flourishing. So that's the family succession type of internal buyer. The second type is a partner buyout. You may be in business with other partners, and your partners may want to stay with the business even though you want out of the business at a particular point in time. So your partners, if they're willing, will buy out your position in the company. The third option is management buyout, where your top management, your top executives are so on fire about wanting to own the company themselves once you're wanting to exit that they'll buy the company from you. And the final is ESOP, and that's where you actually turn the company into an employee-owned company.
That's great. And I think that we should do an episode in the future about ESOPs because I think that's a really great option that many business owners just don't know enough about. But let's get into really quickly. I think we've done a good job as we're describing these buyers of explaining the pros and cons. But there are a couple other things that I just want to make sure that we really highlight as we're thinking about what type of buyer do we like? Do we want to go external? Do we want to keep it internal? Can we keep it internal? And so the first thing that I want to say is internal acquisitions are great because the most surefire way to maintain the continuity of your brand and legacy, but they're often trickier in terms of obtaining maximum value. No matter if you think about selling a business to your child, they're going to want a deal, right? The family discount. And so you're almost obligated to give them a lower price than you could get in a competitive marketplace. And you're never going to have competition if you keep it internal. But they'll also always take on all of the liabilities of the company's history. And so that's a challenge for the buyer. Now, the good news is that these internal buyers already know the company. They already have a really good idea of what those historical liabilities are. So it's easier for them to make that decision. And the due diligence process is much more simplistic when you're doing an internal transaction than if you're selling to a stranger in the external market.
Indeed, it sure is. And in terms of external sources of purchasing your company, your business's liabilities might or might not transfer to the new owner, stock sale or asset value. And due diligence that you do or that they do even more often can lead to a retreading of the deal terms, a reworking of the deal terms because of material findings that surfaced during due diligence that hopefully you didn't intentionally withhold, because that's a really big problem in and of itself, but where things surfaced that you really didn't think about or didn't take into account, despite good intentions to be transparent.
Yeah, and there's surprises in due diligence, a really big issue. And that's, again, where having a good team and taking the time to prepare your business before you take it out to market is so important. Let's move on a little bit to point number 3, which is understanding the type of transaction you're looking for. When we talk about exit planning and when most people think about selling your business, they think, I've got to sell it all. This is an all or nothing thing. I'm not going to talk to any buyer until I'm ready to leave the business. That's an option, and that ultimately is what should be done. But before you're ready for that, there are other options. And the most common options are recapitalizations. And you can recapitalize for several reasons. You can recapitalize because your business doesn't have the cash flow that it needs to get to the next level, but you know in your heart that that next level is there. You can recapitalize. You can sell a portion of the company and bring on a partner that brings on the resources that the company needs to get to the next level. And what you retain in equity value then will grow. And so you get the opportunity to take some chips off the table, as they say, reduce some of your overall risk and put some money in the bank, but also be there when the company realizes what you know is the next stage. And then you can exit fully at a much higher value. And there are 2 different types of recapitalizations. There's majority recapitalization, where you sell 51% or more of your company to a buyer that will bring expertise, professionalization, cash, sometimes an executive team to the table to drive the business to the next level. Or if you think that you've got all the capabilities, the leadership team, the skill set, the wherewithal to get to that next level on your own, and all you're really missing is cash, then you could do a minority recapitalization, selling 49% or less of your business to take on a partner that has a checkbook. And so really thinking about where is your business at, what are your long-term objectives, and understanding what makes the most sense as far as a sale goes today.
Mm-hmm. Well said, and really, really important. I'm kind of stepping back to the 40,000 foot level as I'm listening to you and me, and I'm realizing that what we're covering in this episode is a kind of overview that, in my experience, is very rarely offered to business owners. So I'm feeling a whole nother wave of gratitude that we're doing this episode on this topic.
Brilliant. I love it.
And with that, let's move into the success roadmap. So what we want to unpack is 4 key decision-making guidelines based on everything that we've just covered. And the first of those decision-making guidelines in selling a business and finding a good buyer is to determine what your business is actually worth and the state of your market that the business is in. And we've already, of course, covered those, but it's really a crucial decision-making guideline. Determine your business's actual value and the state of the market when you're wanting to sell.
Absolutely. And for those of you who listen to our podcast regularly, you hear us beat this drum a lot. Start early because things change, right? And if you don't like where your business value or where your market is today, then as long as you started early, you've got time to adjust. If you love it and the market is great, even if you weren't thinking about selling, you might realize that now's a great time. And so the second piece to success is right along that same vein, and that's figure out what type of buyer you're looking for and what type of transaction you're looking for, and then create a plan to figure out where they're at and how you can get your business in front of them where they're at so that you're setting yourself up to be most attractive to getting their attention.
Yes. The next decision-making guideline is that as you're telling your story to the M&A firm that is assisting you and to prospective buyers, make sure you're extremely clear about the specific profile in a buyer that you're looking for so that you become maximally attractive to the right ones.
Absolutely. And I love that you bring in that as you're explaining and telling your story to your advisory firm, because your advisors are the ones who can really help crystallize that for you, because you can say, these are the things that I want. I want somebody that's going to put my employees first. I want somebody that is going to be more concerned with integrity, quality, and legacy than in squeezing out every dime of profit. And your advisors can translate that into, okay, this is the type of buyer you're looking for. I know 25 private equity groups that fit bill, but we might want to think about these synergistics as well because they're extremely high integrity companies. Your advisory team can really help you out with all this work. And that leads us to the last piece, which is be patient. A lot of business owners right now are coming to us when they're tired, when they just want to get out. They don't want to have to put in a year of transition time. They don't want to have to put in a couple extra years to build their value and make sure that their executive team is there. And they're like, I know that I'm going to take a discount, but I just have to get out. I can empathize with that. Really, I can. But I can tell you from experience, the long-term implications of seller's remorse and feeling like you made a bad decision because you were in a hurry are much, much worse than the few months or the year that it will take to really wait for the right buyer and put together the best quality deal that you can. And again, the earlier you start, the less patience you have to exhibit when you actually pull the trigger on this. But no matter when you start, this is a marathon process. It takes time. So have that mental mindset going into it that I'm going to be patient. I'm going to make sure that this is the right thing, the right buyer for my company and the right deal for my future. And then, and only then, will I pull the trigger on executing a letter of intent.
Well said.
Thank you. And I think that brings us to the final takeaways for this episode. And my takeaway, Doctor, is if you don't know what you want in a buyer, you're certain that you won't get it.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just piggyback on that to say, if you do know what you want in a buyer and you don't do proper vetting, you're never sure to get it either.
Perfect. Yeah. So just make sure that you know what you want and you don't settle for less. So on that note, on behalf of Dr. Gruder and myself, we want to thank you so much for listening to this episode. It's always fun to share thoughts and ideas with you. We invite you to click the subscribe button so that you can be notified immediately when we drop our next episode. And also, please throw your thoughts and feedback into the comments section so that you can help us shape the future of this podcast into something that is not only interesting, but valuable for you and your peers. And lastly, I'd love to invite you to take advantage of Blue Sky's free surveys for gauging your business health and your infrastructure and your strategic planning capacity more accurately. We've got a series of small, very brief surveys that provide a whole host of meaningful, actionable information that you can take back to your business and start to strengthen and improve those things today. It's all free, and you can find it at blueskyadvisors.net. So we hope you get started with that and enjoy growing value, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode.
That's all for this episode of Boosting Business Value. May your new learning result in the smoothest and most profitable exit strategy for your business. With the right knowledge and guidance, the sky's the limit to what you can do. Do not miss an episode by subscribing to the show. And if you want to learn where your business currently stands, we also have free key opportunity assessments. Find all of them at blueskyadvisors.net/podcast. Thank you for joining us. See you on the next one.